What is grief, basically?
All right, thank you very much. That's a good question and a good place to start. And thank you for me on the show today. So, grief is what comes after mourning. So, there's the loss or the death, and then there is the mourning, and then there is grief. Grief is what comes immediately after the mourning period. So, it's what describe it as the psychological response to the loss and especially the loss of a close relative. It's a lot more manifested emotionally. You can see it's an emotional response to the particular loss. It has physical symptoms, and it also has mental symptoms, and it has emotional symptoms, but it is also has an aspect of the social and the cultural and traditional dimensions, because different communities are going to grieve and mourn differently. So it has that aspect. So, but more of emotional and a psychological response after the mourning. And when we talk about that mourning phase, is exactly what happens. The things that we do, the activities, the rituals that grieving families or bereaved families perform before the burial and during the burial. Then after that, then we begin to talk about the onset of grief.
All right.
I don't know if that makes it's clear. Yes.
All right. And even as before we even talk about the whole impact, many people really say that time heals. How true is this?
Time does heal. It's true. Over time, the grief experience or the intensity becomes lighter, lesser. But not just time alone. It has to be accompanied by other things. It has to be accompanied to make it much lighter. Time heals when there are no compounding issues, or multiple losses. So it's not just the aspect of time, but it is also the support that the bereaved family have for the individual. It's also if they're getting their psychological support. It's also if they're getting any other form of support. That's when now you can see indeed over time it heals, but not just because it's been 5 years I have healed. If there are many other things that have happened within the 5 years, it doesn't necessarily mean that person has healed, because healing comes from trying to resolve the grief and also comes from whatever form of support that the family needs. Yes, it can be 5 years, but you're still not healed, not anywhere being healed, especially if there are other compounding stressors or many other challenges. Yes.
All right. Now, during all this particular time, maybe 5 years, maybe even 2 years, maybe even a month, how do I know that I have unresolved grief?
Okay. As I answer that question, allow me to just go back just one step. And when we are talking about grief, there are many other factors that determine how soon you process or how well, not how soon, but how well you process it. So number one, it's the nature of death, where death was very, it was very brutal, for example, or where someone died in a lot of pain, or it also depends with the suddenness of the loss. So where someone had been sick for a while, and the family, and the doctors, they're walking this journey, and they're being reminded that we are nearing the end stage. Sort of it helps the family go through what we call preparatory grief. That does not necessarily mean that when the person dies that the family is not affected. Of course, they are going to be affected, and they'll go through all the stages of grief. And then it also depends on the relationship with the deceased person. The closer the relationship, the more intense. Of course, for younger people, like a family losing a child, it's very, very painful. It's very difficult. If the person was the breadwinner, so who is this person? What was the level of relationship, the intents of the attachment? Those are some of the things that make grief very complicated and very difficult to process. But when you talk about how do I know if I'm still struggling with grief over a period of time, and I want to imagine we are working with the assumption that this is not just within a few months after the loss, it's a year and above. And also to let the viewer know that there is no there are no two people who walk the same way on the journey about grief. We all grieve differently. The journey is different for all of us, even if we've lost a parent, then all the siblings are going to process it differently and at their own pace. So what will help someone know that they are still struggling, or when does grief become complicated? When there's continued sadness, the person is sad for a long period of time, and I'll talk about 3 years and above. They're so sad. They're still so low. When we are talking about this individual is unable to bounce back to their work, their functioning is still not high. They're still struggling to move on. They're very angry, anger. They're snapping. They are unable to move on even in terms of their social responsibilities or social life. They are withdrawn. They have very intense feelings of longing for the person who has passed on. They still don't even know what to do with the deceased valuables. They're still keeping them for a long period of time. They're having dreams. It's like the deceased keep revisiting them. They're having nightmares with the person. They're struggling with their sleep. And it becomes serious. It's not just like a 1 week kind of a thing. They're struggling with their appetite. They are constantly having aches and pains. And even when they go to hospital, the aches and the pains really do not have an organic explanation. Then we can look at these symptoms and say probably this person is struggling with complicated grief, among many other symptoms.
Right. I love the fact that you've already got into the symptoms, and my next question would really be the impact grief would really have on someone's body.
Sorry, I think I lost you for a minute.
Okay.
I think I...
Right. Okay. Even as you continue, Dr. Harry, the symptoms, you were mentioning, body weakness, and this largely also speaks on the immunity system. And we normally hear someone say, you know what, I have, my heart is broken, and we take it lightly. Probably someone was in a marriage, and it ends maybe after 2 years, 3 years, and they're going through that divorce, and they tell you,
okay,
the heart is broken.
When you talk about grief and the impact, especially on the individual, grief is a very, very, very intense emotion, one of the strongest of the emotions anyone can experience. So emotions you can't place a finger or point a finger at. So what happens when the body is struggling or the system is struggling with some difficulties or strong emotions, then emotions are placed, or you find them on the body, on the soma, physically on the body. And this is where now we are talking about the aches and the pains. The other thing about grief is that because of the high level of anxiety or distress, then the individual's immune system is lowered down. Too much anxiety or high level stress on the system lowers the immune system. So what does that mean? It puts the person at a risk of any other chronic illnesses. So they are likely to have the flus and any other illnesses a lot more than another person. And one of the things about grief, because it's so intense and it takes so much energy and saps so much energy from the individual, the people around the the bereaved family, one of the things they should try and do is encourage the family to try and eat healthy. And I know families struggle with, are we eating? Does it look like a celebration or that kind of a thing? Please remind them they're not eating because they're happy, but they're eating because the body deserves that, because then they also need to strengthen their system. If need be, then it would be okay to even consult a doctor if they're really struggling, especially with issues of their appetite and all. We need them to eat right, eat healthy. We need them to sleep so that their body and their system can rejuvenate. That is also what is going to strengthen their immune system.
All right.
I don't know if I missed another question you had asked.
Now my next would be, even as this impact, now comparing men and women, who are more likely to even, process this grief maybe faster? How do different genders process? Because again, even in battles, by the way, you'd rarely see men cry because how society really perceives as a man, you shouldn't be crying because of this and this. As a man, you should be telling us your problems, as compared to even how the female will be processing this grief.
Let's start by saying that grief does not discriminate the gender, the age, and the social strata and all that. They still get affected because of the things that we talked about earlier. The only difference comes in men have been socialized that you don't cry. Grief is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation in a very difficult situation. If it's okay to cry, crying is a perfectly normal, in order reaction to grief. There's nothing about being weak when you're crying because you're in pain, because you're at loss, and the only way to express that is through crying. So it's okay to cry. It's perfectly okay to cry. But having said that, men struggle a lot more with expressing.
Victoria? Right. We'll have Victoria just in a few, even as the network on her side really gets, we really sort that out. But then keep talking to us on our socials using the hashtag Morning Cafe at TV47 News, that is on X, or if you prefer Twitter, 2047, and also TV47KE on. All right, we do have you, Dr. Apologies, you're good now?
Yes, I'm good. Sorry,
Okay,
I think the internet just did a major one. So saying men struggle a lot more with grief because, number one, the people around them do not encourage them to express their feelings. They are more likely to be telling them, come on, you're the man, you need to, keep strong and all that. Everyone is looking up to you. So how are you going to cry? Or how are you going to express this sadness? So they tend to just try and show like they are keeping themselves together, but in the real sense they are really hurting. So they may take a longer time to process grief, as opposed to the people who are verbalizing it, they're expressing it, they keep talking about the person who has left or the deceased and all, compared to women. But let's not say that women process grief better than men, not necessarily. It's just that they probably have a better support system, probably have people around them who are going to encourage them to do that. And it's probably time for a call to men, just allow yourself to go through it. That's not a show of weakness that you're grieving a loved family member. It's actually a show of strength that you're in touch with yourself, in touch with your feelings. You're actually acknowledging the situation and what has happened, and you're allowing yourself to process it one day at a time and the best way that you can do it. And that's why I would encourage, especially these people who do not want to be seen to be processing it. please let's embrace therapy where it's safe space where you can go and be vulnerable and allow yourself to process it. The reason why probably it would hit a woman a lot more is especially because of the nurturing and the care giving aspect, because women do more of the nurture roles or carry out more of the nurture roles, and especially if it is the husband has died, was the primary caregiver, and the woman has to take over the role. But that does not mean that when a man is bereaved of the wife that he doesn't go through the same. They still go through the same. But women tend to now also go over and above and provide even caring and nurturing even to the larger family, and there is that expectation of the larger family, and it's like they're also expected to pick up their pieces very quickly and move on. They're more likely to struggle with grieving for a long period of time, because unlike a man who can, the society is also, flexible and sort of allows them to, you need to get a wife very quickly and move on. Then it's the reverse for the woman.
Yeah.
But to sum it up is to say that both genders will go through it, will experience it, and it's going to be as complicated for anyone. And what everyone needs is just that support, that they all go through it, but process it in a different way.
And Dr. one would ask now, is it advisable to shut off this, processing of grief, depending on, the circumstance that you're probably in? We're having this discussion on the backdrop of, my colleague Flora Limki spoke to Kirinyaga Women Rep, Jury Maina, and she was talking about the grief, after during the electioneering period, after losing the father. So this would, be assumed that it was a very important time for her as she focuses on the elections, and not only her, even many people across the world. Maybe they hit by grief, but then on the other side of their life, there's a big thing, happening. For example, you have grief and then you're preparing for even a job interview. Is it advisable to shut off that and then say, I'll come to focus on this later?
Absolutely not. Not advisable at all, not recommended at all, not healthy. Not healthy emotionally, psychologically, and eventually, like we said, emotions are trapped in the body, not healthy physically. What happens is that because it's so intense, I may quickly think I need to jump in and do the things that I need to do. Maybe I have a family, I have a job to go back to, and I only had 5 days of compassion leave, and I need to go back to work. And I want to bounce back as quickly as I can. But what usually happens is that you've simply just pushed it or trying to push it to the back of your mind. But as long as you've not processed that, every day you meet triggers that remind you. You'll meet someone, for example, who will ask you, how is your mom? Or how is the person who is you've lost? Because they never even got information that deceased, they are not there. You will go to a place where you visited with this person. You'll remember some reminders and triggers all around us. And those triggers will send us to the grief experience. It's like they unlock that cabinet where I think I have locked that grief and I want to deal with it now until a later time. Those triggers, because they're all over around us, are the keys to this cabinet. And so it keeps flying, the door keeps flying open and keeps flying open. And 1 minute I find myself in that experience, then I'm running a campaign, or I'm back to work and I need to bounce back and I need to move and I need to behave like all is well. I keep being taken back to that cabinet, because every time I pass there, that door of that cabinet is open. And the only best way to process and to deal with grief is to face it and is to deal with it and try and resolve as much as possible. Only when I talk about the time aspect of it. When I keep it, those emotions and intensity, and whether I'll still be going through all the stages of grief. I'm denying. I am angry. I have, all the regrets that I am dealing with. And as much as I want to deny that, there are roles that the deceased person was doing. They had responsibilities. They need to be done. And I find myself being asked to do one or two things that someone was doing because nature holds vacuum and family systems do not have vacuums.
Right.
So it's, I guess, a lot more of just trying to deny and just trying to think that I am strong, I'm dealing with it right now. But I can tell you every day there's a trigger that reminds you there's something that I need to deal with, there's something that is causing or trying to attract my attention. And over time, when I do not deal with this, it becomes now complicated grief. That's what's going to lead to anxiety. That's what is going to lead to other complications.
Okay.
That is what is going to trigger now the other chronic illnesses or medical conditions because it's asking to be addressed. And all I'm doing is denying that it never happened. But I can bet there's not a single 1 day or 2 days that will pass without a trigger that reminds me, Margaret, you have something to deal with. There's a loss that you still need to process. So it's not healthy at all. It's not recommended. Let's not do that. Let's encourage ourselves to face it, deal with it, resolve it so that it gets lighter and we become more healthier.
Right. Dr. Briefly, your parting shots, even as a society, how we process grief.
I think what I would tell us about how we process grief is that, number one, let's remember it's not normal. Death is not normal. Yes, we all are Christians and talk about it, but death is not normal and that we respond to grief differently. Let's not try and rush people. Let people walk their journey. We don't need to rush them. And then the other thing we need to remember when we are talking about supporting people or ourselves about how to process grief is that we are human beings, we are vulnerable, and that it takes time. And the truth of the matter is that the individuals, significant persons around the one who has gone or the deceased person, we never really get to our pre-loss level of functioning. We never really get there, but we function and we find our way and we find our grounding and we find our bearing and we move on. But only if we remember that we need to talk about it and we need to get the right professional help. And asking for help is not a show of weakness, it's a show of strength. And we all need someone to walk with us through our grief journey.
All right, asante sana Dr. Anne Gatuma for those wise ones. Asking for help is not a sign.
Margaret Nje here.
Sorry?
It's Margaret Nje here.
Oh, pardon me. Okay. Margaret, for that, a psychologist really taking us through how to really